The Great Firewall of China faces a Canadian protest, and an African dream gets a Canadian rescue. Next. Welcome to Listen Up. I'm Lorna Dueck. Taking the first steps to some of the most challenging problems in the world doesn't come without controversy. And today we look at two cases the public is watching with a judging eye. Internet access faces restrictions in China. It's been called the Great Firewall of China. Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo, the giants of the internet, have agreed to a compromise with communism for market access. Is it a sellout of human rights in exchange for profit? It's raised questions for those trying to protect persecuted Christians, religious followers, and dissidents for freedom in China. We'll examine that dilemma today. And another communications giant faces a different kind of problem in Africa. Author Bruce Wilkinson sold over 22 million copies of the world's fastest-selling nonfiction book, Prayer of Jabez. This self-help prayer book taught that any dream was possible with God. The book's success launched its author into creating Dream for Africa. But that continent's problems recently pushed Bruce Wilkinson into early retirement and away from his African mission. Today, we'll talk with the Canadian couple appointed to replace Bruce Wilkinson and help recover the dream to help Africa. But first, China's Great Firewall. Here's Listen Up's Melinda Estabrooks.
Hi Lorna, I'm here at the beautiful Munk Center at the University of Toronto talking to self-described hacktivists from the Citizen Lab who are monitoring international web censorship. Come and take a look.
I find it objectionable as a human rights activist and as a researcher interested in human rights that Google has set up a service that essentially compromises basic human rights like access to information and freedom of speech, and is kowtowing to the Chinese government to try to gain a foothold in the market. But on the other side of the equation, I think it's remarkable that Google has been as transparent as they have been about it. They came out and said, we're doing this service. And in them doing that, it raised this issue that we've been exploring now for several years, and that's the extent to which Western corporations are involved in internet censorship and surveillance around the world. The Google China case is very interesting, but it's really only the tip of the iceberg. There are many other companies out there that are doing similar, if not worse things from a human rights perspective, and there are dozens of countries, and the number is growing, who engage in some sort of internet content filtering. The internet now, rather than being a network of networks, is a network of filters and choke points. And so states and corporations are taking active measures to parse out, to filter, to control information, to survey what people do online. And that's really infringing on this promise that the internet once held as being a support for human rights. When Google came out with their special Chinese search engine service, we created this neat little tool called the Google China Search Comparison Tool, or as I like to call it, Choogle, that gives you a screenshot comparison of an identical search made in the Google Chinese service and the Google regular service. And we produced a series of sample searches that someone coming to this site could check out for themselves. So a good example would be if you search for the BBC News in the Google search engine and the Google regular search engine, you see you get completely different results. On the regular Google search engine, you'd get dozens of responses and links directly to the BBC News homepage. But on the Google Chinese search engine service, you see here that it says there's no such site found in Chinese. So it gives you a sense of the different perspectives on the internet that you would get from different countries around the world. These computers here that are about the size of a CD-ROM drive, it's a black box computer. And what we do is we outfit that computer with network interrogation tools. And then we take this to a country where we suspect internet filtering is going on, and we connect it to the internet. Here you see we have
Oh my.
a temporary keyboard. And once this is connected, you can see it could fit in a CD-ROM slot. So it's surreptitious. You know, it's easy to take into these countries and not be exposed. Once it's in the country, we turn it on, the network interrogation tools start running and mapping the internet and sending the data back here to the lab where we analyze. We need to reclaim the internet as a space for civic communications and freedom of speech and access to information. And to me, that very much is part of the Canadian tradition as a country that supports human security.
China is considered the world champion in controlling what their citizens read and do online. To discuss the implications of that, Michael Craig, the China liaison for Amnesty International, and Glenn Penner, human rights advocate for China with Voice of the Martyrs. You were arrested 3 times, and it resulted in a longer jail time. How bad did it get in jail for you?
The third time came up in 1996. My wife and I were arrested in the name of illegal evangelizing, just because I led a house church in Beijing and also later on ran an underground Christian school. Again, was called illegal religious activities and was subject to arrest. And many of the pastors, maybe thousands of them, are arrested even now in Chinese prison.
Well, China is considered the world champion in controlling what their citizens read and do online. To discuss the implications of that, we're joined by Michael Craig, the China liaison for Amnesty International, and Glenn Penner, a human rights advocate for China and a communications director with Voice of the Martyrs. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Okay, I want to take the side of Google for a moment and the internet giants, because they say a little internet is better for democracy, or at least internet access is better for democracy than no internet at all. Is it a sellout? What's your view, Michael?
Absolutely, it is a sellout. I'm very disappointed in Google, in Yahoo, in Microsoft, also in Nortel, these big IT companies that have sold their soul for the almighty buck that's available in China.
What's been lost in this sellout?
Well, now when people in China try to Google things like human rights or Tiananmen Square, they don't get anything pertaining to human rights. Freedom, can't go with freedom. Democracy, another word that's verboten. So people can't get the truth in China.
Glenn, what's the opinion of those speaking out for the faith community on the Google and the Microsoft move?
Well, again, I like to use it, dealing with the devil in the hope of saving hell. The idea is, well, okay, we do business there, that'll help it to become more democratic. You know what, there's never been any evidence that trade with a totalitarian regime has ever contributed to democratization. And particularly now, when we're contributing, in a sense, to the very suppression of information, the very things that bring those who would bring democratization and freedom to that country, they're not going to be able to communicate to each other. That's the deliberate strategy behind limiting the internet in China.
Okay, Google is saying we're going to move our search engines, out of China. The material, the information will not be able to be seized. Is that not another? Like, they're really trying to. You're not buying it, Michael.
Well, I'm simply feeling that it has the potential to deal with one of the problems. The problem that Yahoo ran into when they provided the Chinese government with the name of someone who was posting things on Google. And the country promptly put that person in jail for 10 years using the Yahoo information. That might solve that problem, but it doesn't solve the problem of free access to information for the Chinese people.
Okay, so tell me what happens to a Chinese person when they embark upon, blogging or exchanging that might be what I would take for granted.
Well, a perfect example is a friend of mine here in Toronto who is a Chinese human rights and democracy activist and a journalist. She's written a book. If you Google her name here in Canada, Sheng Shui, you will find thousands of hits pertaining to the work that she's been doing for years. Google China, she doesn't exist.
From a religious liberty perspective, we've got a situation where in the last 3 years, even in the last 6 months, we're seeing a crackdown, particularly on house church leaders, a new strategy which they've adopted in order to take away, they hope, advocacy work, is they charge these house church leaders with heinous crimes, murder, rape, conspiracy to defraud, theft. One, it hides the statistics, so we have really it's very hard for us to figure out how many people are in jail because of their faith. But secondly, people say, well, why do I want to advocate for a murderer, for a rapist? And when political leaders, from Canadian leaders, political leaders go and speak to Chinese authorities, they say, well, this is a criminal.
Glenn, I get your emails, and I think every week I am hearing 2, 3 more legal cases where people are being persecuted for what I take totally for granted. And then through it all, I still hear this courage, whether you're an internet dissident, whether you're a freedom activist, a Falun Gong, or a Christian in a church that does not want to compromise their personal belief. Glenn, what is at the core of that kind of determination?
Well, they understand that as a Christian, if they're going to accomplish the purposes of God, they're going to face opposition. And they're prepared to take that price regardless of what that might be. It's not right. It shouldn't be that way. But they understand theologically that is inevitably a part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And they're prepared to pay that price. And they really do live it out more than what you and I experience. I mean, we talk about lawyers. If you're a Christian lawyer, if you're any kind of lawyer, if you're going to defend persecuted Christians, you had better be prepared then for about 2 or 3 years afterwards to find another occupation, because you're going to lose your license to practice law.
And that's happening.
Oh, it's happening all the time.
Both of your organizations have tried to train those of us in freedom to be activists, and it's probably never been easier now with the internet. Are people doing it?
Oh, yes. Amnesty's membership around the world has gone way over 1 million, close to 2 million people now who are writing letters, who are setting up tables, who are informing the populations in their own countries, and who are giving them hell in countries that are responsible for human rights abuses on a large scale.
And how does, given this censorship of the internet, how is my message even going to get through to a Chinese official?
It gets through. As I said, it is leaky. Their information will get through. It gets through, too, from various ways in which Chinese activists here in North America are able to transmit the information back. One of the things that the Chinese government cannot control is cell phones.
All right.
There are millions of them, and so they'll talk over the cell phone and say, or by text messaging and saying, this is what we're finding out, this is what's going on. And I have a dear friend who is up all hours of the night. I mean, I've stayed in the same hotel room with him, and in the middle of the night, he's getting phone calls from China.
Well, Michael Craig of Amnesty International and Glenn Penner with Voice of the Martyrs, thank you so much for bringing your perspective to this fascinating story of internet access in China and what's really at stake for those who do not have freedom of expression. Well, we'd like your feedback. Our internet is uncensored, open dialogue. Write to us at listenuptv.com. And our viewer question this week is, gaining market access an effective way to pressure China into improving its human rights record? What's your view? Or you can also write to us for how to email the Chinese government to request freedoms for Chinese citizens and faith groups, how to get connected to the guests and their activism packages that you just heard about. When we come back, a communications giant of a different sort. Dr. Bruce Wilkinson sees his dream for Africa get a rescue plan from a Canadian couple. That story next. Welcome back to Listen Up. Inspiration is a valuable commodity that can make dreams come alive. When 22 million copies of the self-help prayer book, The Prayer of Jabez by Bruce Wilkinson sold, it launched its author into an enormous dream for improving life in Africa. His philosophy that anything is possible with God hit some roadblocks there, and Bruce Wilkinson shocked his African partners by unexpectedly going into retirement. We'll find out why and how a Canadian couple hopes to fulfill that dream in Africa. First, here's a look back at high-profile hopes for Africa. How did your position as a best-selling author help you in Africa?
It has a surprising answer. First, I never longed to be a best-selling author. It wasn't on my list of goals or wishes. This was a surprise. It's turned out that that is a huge door opener. When I was with the president of Nigeria, he says, I read your book. Everywhere I go, they give me your book. When I was with Zambia, the president comes around his desk and said, I've read your book twice. Put your hands on my shoulder and pray for me. I go over to the president of Malawi, and his daughter says, you know, this is the author I was telling you about. Everywhere I go, the Prayer of Jabez, Secrets of the Vine, and Dream Giver have opened the doors at the highest level. And it's almost like it's a shock to me. So we began to go to people's shacks and say, do you have any food? No. You have any money? No. Do you want some food? Of course. Well, why don't we make it so it can keep on growing? So we started planting what we call never-ending gardens, right where people live.
Yeah, and you're up to 1 million, is that correct, this year, you hope?
We started last year in January, formally with Dream for Africa, that's the name of it, www.dreamforafrica.com. And our goal was to plant 100,000 gardens. This is ridiculous. But God was in it, and we planted 100,650. And then this year's goal is 1 million gardens. And we're well on the way. There's a group right now in Swaziland that are planting probably 25,000 gardens in 1 week. I was talking to a bunch of secular producers and directors and writers and actors and actresses in Hollywood. And they wanted to know, how do you explain the Prayer of Jabez outselling everything else? And I said, well, because God loves to answer it for everyone. And they, well, yeah, right. How do you mean that? I said, okay. Have you ever had God tell you in your heart, you knew it, you might not have said it was God, but you knew you were supposed to go talk to that person. You're supposed to give that person money, and you felt uncomfortable, and you said no. If you've had that happen, would you raise your hand? Everybody raised their hand. I said, could it be that that person over there was saying to God, please help me? And then God says, okay, and it touches your heart, says go help him. And you say no, and the person there says no, and all of us says no. And here comes somebody else who says, wait a minute, wait a minute.
Yes.
Enlarge my territory, send me.
And that's what's happening in Africa for you.
No, that happens to everyone. Anytime anyone says to God, use me more, expand my territory, you don't have to convince God. God's looking for people because he's got all these needs everywhere. So it's not just for me. I've been doing it for a long time, so God has enlarged it a lot, more than I ever dreamt or thought, imagined. But it's not based upon gift or talent. I'm a very normal person.
Ian Maxwell is the new president of Heart for Africa. His wife, Janine, is the vice president of Hope Initiatives for the organization. Thank you both for joining us. Everybody wants to know, how is Dr. Wilkinson? How's Bruce?
He's great. He's vacationing right now. I think he's taking 3 weeks to, I don't know if he's on a cruise or what he's doing, but he's in good health. And I'll tell you, his wife Darlene and his family are really happy to have him spend a little bit more time focusing on them and less time focusing on the rest of the world.
Was the $190 million dream ill-advised? And I'm thinking what I've seen about the Swazi press, you know, that they're very protective of anyone who wants to actually buy a piece, such attractive land as Dream for Africa was going to do with the Village for Orphans. Was it ill-advised?
We had written a memorandum of understanding, a proposal that was submitted to the Swazi government. It was a proposal. There were big numbers involved. Currently in Swaziland, there is 89,000 orphans. The World Health Organization predicts that it'll be 120,000 within the next 3 years. These are big problems. With a population of 1 million people, they need a big solution. But it was a proposal.
Okay, and I love this about the proposal because you've been nice enough to let us in on some personal correspondence dated just March 3rd from the Swazi government. And it writes, pardon me, this is, tell me who this is. This is the Minister for Enterprise and
Dlamini.
Okay, the Minister for Enterprise and Development. And he writes, please do not let one failed proposal deter you from continuing to provide unique and workable solutions. And they write that the Never Ending Gardens program, hundreds of thousands of backyard gardens have been planted. Not only did your volunteers plant gardens, but they also passed on the knowledge of how to grow our own food. Seeing your volunteers in the field planting seedlings on their hands and knees. Janine, how many gardens have been planted with Hope for Africa?
In 18 months, with Heart for Africa.
Heart for Africa, sorry.
In 18 months, we've planted more than 500,000 gardens, and that will feed more than 4 million people. And many of these gardens, in fact, most of these gardens are planted in backyards, and in many cases, there are children who live in these homes who have no parents.
Okay, I want to talk about you as a couple, because this was a very high-profile problem. Tell me why you would give up a career in regular business marketing and a very lucrative career to care for Africa, specifically Swaziland.
Well, that's longer than I have to actually tell you, but I came to a point in my life where we decided to, as a couple, to change our course of life. We wanted to go from a time of success to a time of significance. And in going through that transition, I ended up going to Africa. My wife had already been there a number of times. When I decided to join the team, it wasn't this high-profile situation that we're in now.
But you were a volunteer.
I was a volunteer.
And it was all rolling smoothly, smoothly.
Yeah, it was
The
rolling.
smoothest things do in Africa.
The smoothest things I do in Africa, yeah. And it went really, really well. And I fell in love with the company. I fell in love with the people. There are people in need. That need's not going to go away because of some press.
Okay, Janine, you understand marketing. You founded one of Canada's most successful marketing firms. I mean, Pepsi was your pitch. Mm-hmm. You went to Africa. What happened to Pepsi and its pitch in your life?
Well, the first time I went was April 2003, and I came back and knew that I was to close my business.
This is a $20 million a year business.
It was a $20 million a year business.
And you just said, that's not the message I want my life to give anymore? What?
Well, I went out. I met so many children who are living on the street. I have photographs that I brought with me today where there are 9 children under the age of 10 living in a home by themselves. And these aren't even orphans. We're talking about all these orphans right now because of the AIDS pandemic. And these kids are just vulnerable children. Just vulnerable children. 9 children under the age of 10, and they're living alone, feeding, caring for each other. They're sitting, shaking each other, these little ones who are 2 and 3 years old, because their mother is gone off and she comes home every 2 or 3 weeks. So they don't even qualify within the numbers that we hear and read about all the time. And I think it's so important when you think, we think 14 million children right now are orphaned by the AIDS pandemic in Africa. But we have to think about the one child.
And it takes one couple like you to, we can all do something about this. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know I have looked and examined what the press has been saying about Dr. Wilkinson's story. I haven't been able to interview him personally since his departure from Africa. But it's a success, even though he's moved on, because it's amazing what's able to happen. And you're still recruiting. You'd like to see how many people go in the next number of months. And how do I qualify to go?
Well, what you do is you go to our website, www.heartforafrica.org, and you can sign up for a trip. Mm-hmm. And they're 10-day trips, door to door. It's $3,000 US from Atlanta. And you can go over and you can help plant gardens. You can help plant seeds of hope. You can come and work in an orphanage for a week and really see for yourself, rather than just giving money. Money is important because we need money to feed people, but you can go and see for yourself. Okay. See what the work is, what's doing, and see how well supported we are, because we have government officials like the Minister, Lutfo Dlamini, who come and actually speak at our dinners and welcome our American friends and our Canadian friends.
Well, congratulations to both of you. You have put your money and your personal commitment, your whole lifestyle at the service of Swaziland, haven't you?
We have. More at the service of Africa, because we're in South Africa as well. And we're actually going to be going up to Malawi later on this year as well. We're opening up a region there.
All right, so the good work of Dr. Bruce Wilkinson grows on. It moves from Dream for Africa to Heart for Africa. And congratulations to both of you, the new successors appointed to lead that. And there's much more on our website about Heart for Africa. And we can check that out there at listenuptv.com. Find out how you can take a trip to Africa with a great ministry. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Closed captioning provided by Duca Financial Services Credit Union. Discover more affordable banking at duca.com.
Well, they could call this a bestseller, but it's free. It's Our Daily Bread, one of North America's most popular spiritual resources for the questions that affect your lives. Available for you at keypromises.org, no cost or obligation. Order your copy today. Two wide-ranging topics today about just how complicated it can be to press ahead for what's right. China's story of internet access negotiated amid those suffering for freedom shows Asians unwilling to change their moral compass, sacrifice for a greater good. Our story of a recovery work in Africa has that same stubbornness, first from Bruce Wilkinson, then his successors Ian and Janine Maxwell. The Bible called such activity faith, building with a view in mind that you are part of care for the world that is bigger than simple human hands or timetables. And that's this week's spiritual view of news in the world. Check out more at our website at listenuptv.com. Drop us an email at listenuptv.com. Thanks for watching. I'm Lorna Dueck.